Should you be buying a home right now? It's a question that pops up all the time. Bill hears it all the time at Cross Country Mortgage. Well, it's all about the math, right? When you run the numbers and actually look at the statistics, the data, and crunch all the numbers, calculate everything, you get a return that tells you one way or the other, should you or shouldn't you? We're going to tell you that today. We're going to break it down. Bill's going to give us the math, and we're going to have some answers for you coming up today on the Smart Mortgage Show. Welcome in. Glad to have you on the show. Once again, I'm Ben George with Bill Litton, Regional President, Cross Country Mortgage. You can find us online, smartmortgageshow.com. What's going on, Bill?
Hey, Ben. How are you today?
Very good. I know if anybody's watched or listened to a past episode of ours, they know that you like to run the numbers. You follow the math quite a bit and follow statistics, data, that sort of thing. So I'm looking forward to today's episode because I know people are still asking the question, is now a good time to buy, right? That's the question that still continues to come up.
It's the biggest question that we get. Yeah. Rates are higher. Values are higher. We're waiting for the market to correct. We're waiting for house values to plummet, and then we're going to swoop right in. We're trying to time the market. And unfortunately, a lot of where they get their information from is news headlines, internet news headlines. And those headlines are made to really get your attention to draw your eye to the advertiser, right? So what we like to do is dispel that kind of myth using math.
Yeah, it's so important because, as you point out, the news wants to make us believe one thing in many cases. And right, with all the headlines about mortgage rates and all this stuff, it makes you feel like, hey, I need to hold off because I'd be buying at the top of the market maybe. So let's talk about what the math actually shows us. And I want to start with where we are in terms of increase in home prices and home value, I guess, over the last year or so. And looking at the numbers, and again, if you are listening on a podcast, join us on YouTube as well. We have some graphics that support what we're talking about today that will really kind of highlight some of the numbers that we're talking about, some of the points that Bill wants to make today. But percent change in home prices, again, still very healthy, and the Mid-Atlantic has still continued to tick up pretty significantly.
Yeah, so this estimate this is a forecast, okay, and it's based on Q1 2024, okay, and it runs from December through December. And basically, so year over year performance in 2024, we're expecting 3.78%. And similar growth, 3.36 in 2025, 3.87 in 2026, 4.18 in 2027, 4.11 in 2028. So that type of growth is very healthy. I do believe that this forecast is also a little bit conservative. So I like to kind of worst case the numbers and always err on the side of caution. I believe this, barring any unforeseen extenuating circumstance like a war or a pandemic or something that's just, geopolitical in nature that could certainly change the variables of this equation, this should hold true. This should be pretty close. And if anything, I think it's a little bit conservative.
So you see the numbers there, right? Between 3.3 to 4.1, 4.2% increase is the forecast, right? So what does this actually mean on paper? Because that's kind of where people can really determine and see the true value of something. So the next graphic we have here, based on purchasing a $400,000 home in January of this year, 2024, you could actually put together some pretty incredible household wealth just based on buying a home.
Yeah, and Ben, I think it needs to be said that this is typical of historical growth. We've seen this. We can look back at history to see this type of growth. And you've, some of the older folks who may be listening, you've seen it. Some of the younger folks might want to ask the older folks in their lives, hey, what did you buy your first house for? What did you sell it for? Your second house, your third house. Most of the people that I know have experienced this. And so in this chart here, we start with a $400,000 purchase in 2024. And by 2029, the house is worth $483,000, which is a fantastic investment because you're going to have a shelter cost. If you're renting or you own, costs money to live somewhere. Well, you might as well be the owner, paying down your mortgage and enjoying the appreciation.
And that's pretty significant too. I know it feels like when you're buying a home, and I felt this way too when I bought a home in 2018, Bill. Fortunate timing because we've seen the rates and the value of homes go up quite a bit since 2018. But even then, when I bought my home where I live, the person that bought it before me, and thanks to Zillow and all these apps that can track these things, the person that bought the home before me had made $100,000 on the home from when they purchased it to when they sold it in 5 years. And I thought, man, I'm buying this home at the top, but we needed to get a home. We were looking in this area, so it was what it was. But now I've enjoyed even more growth since that time. So even when you kind of feel like, man, this is not a great time to buy, you see that these values, and of course, there's nothing that guarantees the values are going to continue to go up. But just over the history of the housing market, we've seen this, and even when you feel like it's not a great time, this kind of information here shows that that's not always the case.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of misinformation. And like you said, none of it's guaranteed. And I promise you there's a pocket in the country somewhere that is not experiencing this. A pocket, in 2008, we saw a lot of, well, not a lot, but a few areas. Florida can be a little bit more dynamic in range. And Las Vegas was also an area where when values started to decrease in 2008, they decreased a magnitude larger in Las Vegas. And but I would say that by and large, especially in the area that we're in the Mid-Atlantic region, the Rust Belt, things have historically always been resilient.
Well, let's do some more math. And again, as we're going through this and you have questions for Bill at Cross Country, you can always call 484-352-4151. Talk about your mortgage options, begin that conversation, that process. And, of course, Bill and his team will make sure that that they're working to do everything they can to get you into something that fits your financial goals and works within that framework as well. So the math here, another question with the buying a home right now is, well, would it be better just to rent until I wait for rates to drop or, maybe values to come back or pull back a little bit? But, again, the math tells us, Bill, renting versus buying, again, favors homeownership.
In a big way, even at higher interest rates, even with the values increasing the way that they are. And anybody who's been renting over the last 10 years has seen that monthly rental amounts have skyrocketed. Okay, so rents are very inflated. So in this example, we're sharing a graphic here. What you're going to see is somebody buying a $350,000 house versus renting, and this $350,000 purchase, okay, putting down 10%. What you're going to see is over 10 years, the rent payment is going to be much higher than the monthly mortgage payment, with the appreciation of the value of the property going up, with the amortization gain, which is you paying down the loan amount, because every time you make a payment on a mortgage, you put money into a bank account called equity, which is the amortization of the loan. So even if the house never increased in value, you're still paying down the loan with your payments. But great news, values are going to continue to increase. So in this example, with 3.47% in appreciation, we're still gaining $125,000 in appreciation, amortization gain of $40,000, cash flow difference on payments $14,000. And if we take a look at this next slide here, the difference is between renting and owning over 10 years on a $350,000 house, $144,000, which is pretty spectacular. This takes into consideration your closing costs to buy the house and sell the house.
Well, I think where people get caught up is you look at the short term, right? And you look at the immediate near term. Hey, if I buy a house right now, it's going to cost me X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to be in a hole for this year or whatever it might be, versus renting. Well, the rent's a little bit cheap right now. But as we can see, rent, I don't think we think oftentimes rent in 10 years from now is going to be higher than where it is today, versus if I'm buying a home and you don't refinance, obviously, if that's the case, then your mortgage payment is going to stay the same. Now, it might tweak a little bit based on property tax and whatever else, but essentially what your payment is going to be for 15 or 30 years or whatever, versus rent. Who knows where it could be in 10 years from now, Bill? You could be paying significantly more than what your mortgage is, where when you went into it, your rent was cheaper.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think there's definitely more of a known amount of what you're going to be paying in 10 years versus renting because you have no control. Landlord can do whatever they want. Ben, really good point, because if you look at years 1 and 2 of this chart, you can see if you bought the house in year 1 and you sold it in year 1, you lose money, right? If you did it in year 2, you break even. So we always say, if you're thinking that you're going to be moving out of town or out of state, or your job's going to take you somewhere and you don't want to buy something and be a landlord, maybe it's not a good time to buy, because you are going to have some sunk costs that you don't get back, which are your closing costs when you buy a house. But I think the other thing that people don't do enough is kind of extrapolate out years 3 through 10, where you can see the true gains. And that's more indicative of what people really do, right? The average amount of time that somebody owns a house is just about 8 years. So you could go out to that 8-year mark and be pretty confident that's where you're going to end up.
Yeah, that's a pretty good feeling too as well. And the other thing we talk about here is just the cost of waiting, right, Bill? I know we've had some conversation about this in the past, but kind of break down what that means, the cost of waiting, when you're trying to plug in the numbers here and determine if it's a good time to buy.
Yeah, so the cost of waiting is something that we try to impress upon all of our customers, all of our borrowers, people who are thinking about buying a house is, well, I'm going to wait for the rates to come down. And basically what it shows you, and again, check out the graphic, is that if you waited to buy and appreciation is going to continue along the same trajectory, and you move out 3 years, you're missing out on 12.37% in appreciation on that home. So is the lower interest rate that you waited for going to make up for the loss in appreciation? It's not. There's a cost of waiting. If you're really serious about buying a house and your holdup is now a good time from an interest rate and a cost of the house standpoint, there's a lot of data here that we're sharing that suggests that if that's your hang up, there's an old saying that says the best time to buy a house was a year ago, and the second best time is today, and that could be used at any point in history almost, right? So if your hang up is I'm trying to time the market, we're sharing a lot of data that says that might not be the best course of action.
And for anyone that's, I guess, kind of still curious about this, Bill, and wants to kind of look at some of these numbers, because we laid it out here as, what the property value might be today versus, waiting a few years, and then comparing that to where rates are today versus where, they hope they might be, or what would actually get you to maybe move into a home or try to buy a home in a few years. These are things you can plug in and run, right? And say, hey, well, here's what your payment would be today versus in maybe 2 or 3 years when the home value is here and rates are here. Here's what that might look like. So you're able to kind of plug those numbers in and let them truly see for themselves.
Yeah, so what our job is to help educate and help anybody that we're working with to make the very best decisions possible. And sometimes that's just showing up at one of our home buyer seminars and starting to understand these things and what the true implications are of the beauty of the compounding of the appreciation on a property. And then once we start talking to people and working up numbers and scenarios, we're always happy to plug in a scenario that's more in their price range and showing how much money they're putting down. And maybe we adjust the appreciation a little bit based on what they think it's going to be, if they think it's going to be more conservative. And believe it or not, if you bring the numbers down even to a really conservative 2%, it's still overwhelmingly in favor of buying over renting.
Well, hopefully some of these numbers and especially the graphics themselves help you out and give you a better kind of view of what this looks like on paper, because I think it's hard to kind of run the numbers in your head and just try to forecast what a percentage looks like, right? But when you kind of see the numbers on paper and how things grow and what that actually could mean to your wealth accumulation over time by being a homeowner, hopefully that helps motivate you to maybe not wait as long as you were maybe thinking and actually start to act and move in and look for that home that you really had your eyes on and your heart set on. So again, if you have questions for Bill, we'd love to hear from you. You can always call 484 352-4151 for Cross Country Mortgage. But also log on, smartmortgageshow.com. You'll find all of our episodes there. We talk about the cost of waiting in a little more detail. Go back for that episode as well, plus market updates and so much more. And if you're on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. We appreciate your support there. Bill, thanks for your time as always, and I love breaking down the math, and I think today really kind of opened my eyes, especially, I think, to some of the numbers by being a homeowner and putting in the time and staying invested.
Yeah, it's again, Ben, it's all about the math. Let's dig deep into the numbers and see what they say, and I think that I love math because it's black and white.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks for being on another episode of Smart Mortgage Show. For Bill Litton at Cross Country Mortgage, I'm Ben George. Take care. This program is for informational purposes only. Please consult a qualified professional before taking any action. Bill Litton is a loan advisor and regional president with Cross Country Mortgage, NMLS number 147060.